What's up, guys? It's Hax. Hope you're all doing well today. We're going to be taking a break from the educational content to do a tier list video, which I haven't done in quite a while. It's been since 2023, and certain things have changed, so I think this is going to be one of the more interesting tier list videos. Most notably, there's going to be a new character that I've never put on the list of viable characters yet. So we're going from 12 characters to 13 characters, and I think you already know who that new character is, but I will be waiting until I actually place them on the tier list in order to reveal who it is. Now, I'd like to start off by apologizing for these advertisements at the bottom of the website. They're being a real bitch, and I don't know how to get rid of them, so we're just going to have to deal with that. But it shouldn't be too much of a problem. We should be able to sort the characters just fine. And so without further ado, let's jump right into the tier list. We're going to start off with Fox at number 1. Needs no explanation. Fox will always be the best in the game till the end of time. There have been times in Melee's lifespan where people doubted whether or not this was the case. Other characters that people have claimed to be the best in modern times were characters like Jigglypuff. Or you may even think that Marth's the best, especially with the dominance of people like Zane, Mewtwo King, and Ken throughout Melee's history. But ultimately, I think it's generally agreed that on both not just a theoretical, but also on a human level, Fox really is the best in the game. He has the most dominant matchup spread. I think there are only 2 other characters who you could even possibly argue do not lose matchups in this game, all 3 of which are going to be in the S tier. But Fox ultimately has the most dominant matchup spread out of those 3 characters. He is either even or positive against the entire cast. I'd say against most characters, most of the good characters, he wins 55-45, and that's enough to give him the number 1 position. Now that brings me to the character who I think has the next most dominant matchup spread, and that's Marth. Marth is probably the character best equipped to deal with Fox in the entire game. There's only one other character who it could possibly be, but it's generally agreed that Marth is the best into Fox, and that Marth is also very potent into other top contenders like Jigglypuff, Peach. Marth is generally very good into floaty characters, whereas the next character that I'm going to list on the tier list is not as dominant into floaties. Marth happens to have a very strong Fox matchup, roughly even, while also being dominant into a lot of those floaty characters. And I think that solidifies him as being number 2 over Falco. Falco's going to get the number 3 position. Falco is, in my opinion, the final S tier character in the game because he's the only character left who you could even possibly argue goes even with Fox. I think he loses slightly, but he's the only character who you could argue doesn't lose to Fox, and so that's pretty much enough to give him number 3, because having a viable Fox matchup just matters so much. And so I think the only way this realistically changes is by putting Falco above Marth. It could happen in a metagame where the players are unbelievably skilled. This could totally end up being the case. But for now, I think it's generally agreed that that Marth is the better character. One thing I will say about Falco is it's awesome to see Mango's recent resurgence as a contender for winning majors, because I think people were starting to have their doubts that Falco would earn his position over the character who I'm going to rank next on the tier list. But recently, Mango's had a very strong resurgence with this character. I think he's got a positive record on Cody Schwab, who's generally regarded as the best Fox player in the world. And so he has really shown recently that Falco is a top threat for taking major tournaments. So that's awesome to see. And that brings me to the next best character in the game, who in my opinion is Jigglypuff. Now Jigglypuff, although she's not as strong today as she was a couple of years ago, we can't forget that Hungrybox was once one of the most dominant players in Melee history for 3 consecutive years with this character. with this character, he achieved a level of dominance that is still yet to be matched by mains of either of the next two characters that I'm going to list. So I think for that reason, Jigglypuff is solidly the fourth best character in the game. I think historically, just if you look at Melee rankings historically, Jigglypuff is the final character who we've seen pose a serious threat for solo winning major tournaments. However, the reason for the tier break, meaning the reason she's not in S tier, the reason she's in A tier rather than S tier, has to do with the fact that she loses to Fox and Barth. Those are her only two losing matchups, I believe. I don't think she loses any other matchup in the game, but she definitely loses to Fox and Marth, whereas Falco holds his own against Fox mostly. He holds his own against Fox better than Jigglypuff does. So that's my reasoning for the tier break, is that S tier is basically Fox plus characters who lose to him, and here we're going to see the first tier break starting with Jigglypuff, because she definitely has a losing matchup, and Hungrybox has been having a hard time against basically all of the top Foxes these days. That brings me to the next character, that being Sheik. The reason Sheik, and this is no secret at all that it's going to go Sheik, then Captain Falcon. The reason I put Sheik underneath Jigs is because I think it's very clear that Sheik loses to Jigglypuff. I also happen to think that Sheik loses to a certain character in the B tier. I will point out who that character is when I get to them. So I don't think Jigglypuff loses to any character in the B tier or below, and that's ultimately why I have Sheik underneath her. I think it's unbelievably clear that Sheik has a losing Puff matchup. Sheik's got a losing matchup here as well in the B tier, so that's why I have Sheik at number 5. Next up is Captain Falcon. Captain Falcon is way better than I once gave him credit for, but I do think he's kind of stuck in being number 6 in the game at best. The reason I have him here is because he definitely loses to Sheik. He has 3 matchups that are clearly losing out of the characters who are above him, those being Sheik, Falco, and Fox, and he probably slightly loses to Puff as well, although it could be 50-50. Captain Falcon ultimately is going to be the final character in the A tier, because I think there's a very clear tier break coming up next in terms of how much of how good of a matchup spread the character has. So he's the last top or high tier character. After this, we're going to be jumping into characters that are more so mid tier. So now this may be controversial, but at number 7, I actually have Yoshi. Now Yoshi, I'm putting him above Peach, to be clear, and I'll explain my reasoning for that. So like I said, I think there's a clear tier break once you go to tier B. And the reason for that tier break is that now I think Yoshi has, he's got a losing Captain Falcon matchup, losing Sheik matchup, losing Fox matchup. I think the fact that he has a losing Captain Falcon matchup is a big part of the reason that I put him here, because Captain Falcon doesn't really beat anybody above him. His best matchup is Marth out of the characters above him, and that's like 50-50. But Yoshi, he clearly beats. Captain Falcon pretty much whoops everyone in the B tier, except for maybe Pikachu. I think that one's even, but he whoops a lot of the characters in the B tier and below, so that's my reasoning for the tier break. But in terms of why Yoshi goes above Peach, it has to do with the fact that he's way more viable into Jigglypuff and Marth. He's probably even against Jigglypuff and Marth, whereas Peach has horrible matchups against both of those characters. So even though I think Peach wins the head-to-head against Yoshi, I think she's very bad into characters like Puff, characters like Marth, whereas Yoshi really can hold his own. I think Yoshi is kind of the last character down the tier list who you can realistically expect to solo win a tournament with. Once you're getting to the point of Peach or below, it starts to get a lot harder. So that's ultimately my reasoning for Yoshi at number 7, and I think AMSA's results support that theory. So I've got Yoshi at number 7. Then at number 8 we have Peach. Peach is like a roadblock for basically everybody below her. I think she's kind of a roadblock for Yoshi as well. She's really amazing into the characters that go into B and C. Speaking of B and C, there's not going to be a D tier on this tier list. It's just going to be the characters who I consider to be like viable, basically. She's amazing into the B and C tiers, and then she's disadvantaged into basically the entirety of the S and the A tiers, with the exception of Falco, who's kind of like an even matchup. But Peach, in my opinion, is number 8 in the game for the reasons that I went over. I think Yoshi has the better placement for mostly mostly for the reasoning of the Jigglypuff and the Marth matchup. So I give Peach number 8 in the game. Then number 9, we have Ice Climbers. I think Ice Climbers can never go above Peach because they get destroyed by her. That may actually be their worst matchup in the whole game. However, Ice Climbers are amazing into some of the characters who go below them, such as Pikachu. Ice Climbers are almost like an auto-win character into Pikachu, who is very interesting. Pikachu is an interesting case because what solidifies Pikachu as being B tier as opposed to C tier is that he's a very anti-meta character. When I say anti-meta, what I mean is Pikachu is very good into the S tier relative to his tier list placement. He's very good into Fox, Marth, and Falco. And then he's so bad into characters like Puff, Climbers, and Peach. But you have to give him a B tier placement just due to how good he is into these three. And he's also pretty good into Captain Falcon. That matchup's like even. Just for that reason alone, he's solidly a B tier character, and I think there's clearly a tier break now, as opposed to the next 3 characters that I'm going to rank on the tier list. Now here's where things get interesting. At the start of this video, I mentioned that there's a new contender on the tier list. We all know who it is. He's the leader of the bunch. You know him well. It's Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong has surged onto the tier list. He's never been on my tier list of viable characters before. But this is the rare scenario where a new contender has actually been discovered in this ancient game. If you look at Junebug's recent performances, you'll see that Donkey Kong can actually go far at major events, and that this character is better, much better, than we once thought he was. People used to rank Donkey Kong as being below characters like Mario and Dr. Mario. Neither of those characters are going to make it onto my tier list of viables, but Donkey Kong at this point most certainly is. And to make things even more interesting, I think he's better than some of the other characters that I'm going to put in the C tier, mostly because I think he beats them in the head-to-head. So to be clear about who else is in the C tier, it's going to go Samus, followed by Luigi. Now, I used to say that it was Samus and Luigi by themselves. Now I have Donkey Kong as being better than the two of them because, like I said, I think he wins the head-to-head. I also think he's more viable into characters like Puff than either of them will ever be. So I actually think that DK is solidly number 11 in the game. In terms of why Samus and Luigi are the final characters in the C tier, I'll explain. They're both good into Fox relative to their tier list placement. Samus used to be a counter to a lot of high-level Fox mains. We used to see Fox mains struggle with Samus. Now I think Fox mains have generally figured out the matchup. I think people would generally agree that it's like 55-45 in Fox's favor, but that's still good for a character who's in the C tier. That's still enough to give Samus a C tier position. And then Samus, I believe, is better than Luigi, mostly because I think Luigi has a tougher time into I just think he's less potent into stuff like Fox. I think Samus is a bit more potent into Fox than Luigi is, and so that's like my primary reasoning. I think Samus is also better into like Falco. She's just better into Spaceys overall than Luigi is, so that's my reasoning for Samus going above him. But he is like definitively stronger than the characters that don't make it onto the tier list. He's not a very good character in the sense that there's like no shot you ever win a major with him, but he feels definitively stronger than the characters who fail to make it onto the tier list, and so I have Luigi as my final viable character. Now, in terms of who the next undiscovered character might be, meaning like who the next Donkey Kong might be, I think there's a clear answer. I actually think the answer is fairly clearly Adult Link. Meaning, who is the next character that's actually better than people currently think? I think it's Adult Link. I think Adult Link is number 14 in the game. I think he doesn't make it onto either of these 4 tiers, but I really am starting to think that he's number 14 in the game. We see people like Aklo take him out as a serious strategy against people like Zane, meaning Aklo genuinely feels that his Link may pose a better chance than his Fox may pose, which kind of speaks for itself that there's one of the best players in the world who actually thinks this character is a better pick than Fox into any matchup. That's something worth noting. And so Adult Link is a character to look out for. I don't think he makes it onto any of these 4 tiers. If he did, it would be at best right here. But I think he's number 14. Other than that, who else could possibly be undiscovered? Maybe Roy. Roy is pretty good into the Spaceys. He's horrible elsewhere, but he's viable into Spaceys, so he's kind of anti-meta in that regard. Other than that, in terms of who actually goes into the D tier, everyone knows that Dr. Mario and Mario are like decent in that regard. Ganondorf probably comes after them. But in terms of who the remaining anti-meta characters are, I think it's clearly Link and Roy. I think Link and Roy are like probably the next, they could go as high as like 14 and 15, whereas some people may think they're like worse than that. I would look out for those two. But in terms of who the viable characters are in today's Melee metagame, I believe it's these 13. So I wanted to make this tier list mostly because DK's a new contender, like I mentioned, and I think that's awesome that a character actually went undiscovered for that long. It's really cool whenever something like that gets discovered in such an ancient game, and so that's the standout character on today's tier list. Anyway, I hope you all liked the video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy my Melee content, and have a good day, guys.